All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our regular council meeting for Monday, March 13th. Call to order at 6:30 and ask that if you're able, you please rise for the pledge of the national anthem. I'd like to begin by respectfully acknowledging that the town of Shelburne resides in the traditional territory and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, including the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, Chippewa, and the people of the Free Fire Confederation. These traditional territories want to live, work, play, and learn, or keep rich indigenous history and traditions. And with this statement, we declare honor and respect the past and present connection of indigenous peoples with this land, its waterways, and resources. And we encourage residents to review the call to action information by visiting the link which is found on the town website. Reminder to members to declare any interest they may have on respect to any matter in tonight's agenda in accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. On to the minutes from our February 27th meeting. I have a mover and seconder to adopt those minutes, moved by Councilor Donato, seconded by Councilor Gary. Any discussion on those minutes? All in favor? Okay, so the first item is our public planning meeting. Tonight's public meeting is being held under section 34 of the Planning Act. Consider town initiated zoning bylaw amendment for bylaw number 38-2007. The purpose and effect of the amendment is to revise the zoning bylaw definitions and regulations pertaining to converted dwellings and dwelling units located below grade. Currently, the zoning bylaw allows converted dwellings with up to 2 dwelling units on the second dwelling, and the second dwelling unit may be located in a basement as defined, but may not be located in a cellar as defined in the bylaw. Pursuant to the Planning Act, as amended by More Homes Built Faster Act, the proposed amendments to zoning bylaw will update and replace the provision of converted dwellings and for dwelling units located below grade, including new provisions to attach accessory dwelling units within single detached, semi-detached, and street dwellings, and for detached additional dwelling units located in a residential accessory building for a maximum of up to 3 dwelling units on 1 residential lot. The proposed amendment applies generally to all land within the town of Shelburne. Now ask the clerk for the method of notice for tonight's meeting.
Notice of tonight's public meeting was advertised in local media sources. Notice has been posted on the town website.
We'll have a presentation from our town planners, viewers, following this will be on for members of the public, as well as members of the council to ask questions, provide comments. The clerk will also accept written submissions, all submissions, whether they're written oral, rather than be given consideration by the council prior to the decision to be made. Steve, over to you.
Mayor Mills, good evening, members of council. So as the mayor mentioned, this is a public meeting on the Planning Act for proposed zoning bylaw amendment Z 2204. A copy of my presentation as well as my planning report and proposed zoning bylaw amendment 14-2023 are included in the agenda packet. And I believe for the online viewers, you can screen share the presentation as well. So next slide, please. So this amendment stems from Bill 23, as the mayor mentioned. Bill 23 still faster act with the Royal last November 28, 2022. One of the acts that was amended by Bill 23 is the Planning Act, and specifically the requirements under the Planning Act for additional residential units, either in existing homes or in new homes that are built in the future. So on the first slide here, I've just summarized the additional units that the Planning Act as amended by Bill 23 now permits. And it goes one step further than it did previously. Previously, the Planning Act instructed that zoning bylaws have to make provision for these things. It's gone as far as now overriding zoning bylaws where zoning bylaws are conflict. So that is really speaks to the need to bring the zoning bylaws into compliance with these provisions. If we don't, we have limited ability to regulate these things. We're down to the Planning Act, but with the proposed bylaw, this will add some reasonable regulations in addition to updating the provisions for additional units. The other major change here is that whereas prior to last November, the Planning Act said you have to allow for 2 units on a residential property. Could be 1 in the main house, 1 in an accessory building, or 2 in the main house. The new amended Planning Act allows for up to 3 on a residential property. So the zoning bylaws have to allow for that to fall into line with the Planning Act. So there's 2 different ways that those 3 units could be achieved. The first way is with the main dwelling unit and 2 additional units in the main house on the property. And that would apply to semi-detached dwellings, single detached dwellings, and townhouse dwellings. The other way is to have 2 units in the house, including the main and 1 additional unit, and then 1 in the accessory building, somewhere on the property. Now, obviously, not every property in Cheltenham is going to be able to accommodate up to 3 units. It's going to depend on a variety of things: servicing, parking, lot size, ability to access the backyard, enough space to build attached, living dwelling unit, etc. But the important point is that the zoning bylaw does have to reflect these permissions. Next slide, please. So the other important distinction under the Act is just that these rules apply to what's defined in the Act as a parcel of urban residential land. And what that really means is that this only applies in fully serviced areas such as Cheltenham. So there are some existing areas of town that do not have full municipal water and sanitary sewer services yet. And in those cases, these rules would not apply. Those dwellings would have more limitations on any redevelopment or new units. But the majority of the town is fully serviced. So these rules will generally apply throughout most of the time. As I noted, the Planning Act does require that the zoning bylaw be updated to address these matters. It also states that the zoning bylaw is of no effect to the extent that the bylaw is contrary to these rules under the Planning Act. So again, the main point is we have to update the zoning bylaw to address these requirements. There are a couple of more detailed requirements under the Act. One is that municipalities can't require more than 1 parking space per unit for the additional units. And then also that we cannot regulate the minimum floor area. So the building code does require certain floor areas for a dwelling unit. And what the province is saying in the Planning Act is that zoning bylaws can't require a different minimum floor area than what the building code would require for a dwelling unit. Next slide. So I've just briefly summarized some of the issues with the current zoning bylaw. Council will be familiar and with the committee investment as well with the number of applications we've had over the past few years where minor variance is required primarily to deal with this distinction between a cellar and a basement in the bylaw. The root cause of that distinction in the current bylaw is really about trying to limit lower level apartments underneath the main floor to basements that are mostly above grade. I think it's a daylighting thing. It's not out of the building code, but it was an objective back when the bylaw was written in 2007. But that doesn't have any basis in the Planning Act, and it doesn't align with the new Planning Act provisions. So we do have to remove those restrictions. Any basement or lower level apartment will still have to meet, building and fire code requirements. So no concern there, but the requirement to be 50% or more above grade won't apply anymore if this new amendment is approved, and it doesn't apply under the Planning Act as amended. There have been some site-specific rezonings in the past as well, where people have requested and gained approval of up to 3 units on a property. That would be more of an as-of-right permission now with these new regulations. Next slide. So the table on this slide just summarizes the two scenarios in achieving up to 3 units. If you're starting with the main dwelling unit as one, you could have up to 2 additional units in the main dwelling, provided there's no units in an accessory building. And then the second line is just illustrating that if you only have 2 units in the main dwelling, so the main dwelling unit and 1 additional unit, you can have a 3 unit in the accessory building. There are some requirements that apply to those accessory buildings, but the bottom line is the map has to add to no more than 3 units on the property. And next slide. So although we cannot prescribe minimum floor areas, we can regulate how big these additional units can be in the zoning bylaw. And we reviewed kind of best practices and examples from other municipalities and how this is done. Typically for the units within the main house, it is related to the size of the house and the main dwelling unit. So 50% is a pretty common number where you're looking for the additional dwelling unit to be no larger than say half the size of the overall dwelling. There is one exception to that that I think makes sense, and that's that a second unit could occupy the entire basement, excluding any say shared furnace and utility rooms that the main unit requires. For the additional dwelling units that are in the accessory building or detached additional dwelling units, there are some more significant size restrictions needed because you wouldn't want the entire property to be built out with buildings. So what we're recommending is that it should be basically the same provisions that apply to detached garages, in that no more than 10% of the lot area should be used for detached accessory dwelling. And if there are existing accessory buildings or structures on the lot, that will count towards that 10% as well. So if you have a shed and some other accessory structure, you have to add up towards that 10%. And this is really to make sure that there's still enough outdoor amenity yard area preserved on the property. Currently, the zoning bylaw allows for a height of 4.6 meters or about 15 feet for a detached garage, and we think that's a reasonable height standard for a detached dwelling unit as well. And we've also recommended the same setbacks as would apply to detached garage, so 1.2 meters or about 4 feet from the side of your lot lines. The next slide. Parking requirements have been noted. The Planning Act only allows up to 1 parking space per unit to be required. The zoning bylaw currently, and we've maintained this requirement in the proposed amendment, that the required parking space for the main dwelling cannot be in the required front yard. By doing that, that essentially means that there's 2 parking spaces required because one of them has to be at least 6 meters back from the front lot line. So you have that front driveway as kind of the second space. But the Planning Act does require that we allow for tandem parking, which means one parking behind the other in a driveway as meeting the additional dwelling for the parking requirement. We've also just noted that the zoning bylaw already requires that additional dwelling units should not be located in a private garage in a way that would reduce the available parking or create a parking space. And next slide. So one of the important considerations with a detached, say laneway house or accessory building with a dwelling unit is how will emergency access is provided for the fire department, for example. And you can see in the illustration which the province has provided what the requirements would be in the Ontario Building Code and the Fire Code, which is that a certain distance, 45 meters, is required from the fire hydrant to the truck, and then a total of 90 meters from the fire hydrant to the truck to the main entrance of the detached building. So that may create a bit of a restriction on some lots where it's too far into the backyard or too far from a hydrant that you can't supply fire protection adequately, and that would rule out that opportunity. The next slide. For servicing requirements, we have included in the proposed bylaw that municipal sanitary sewer and water connections will be required for all additional dwelling units. Also that there would be a requirement to secure approval of servicing application. That would be through the town engineer and prior to the building permit being issued. And one requirement we proposed as well, and this is very common in municipal zoning bylaws, is to ensure that the finished floor level of the basement is high enough that you can get a gravity flow with the wastewater and not risk sewer backups because of a low floor elevation relative to the sanitary sewer. There's a few other requirements that are a bit more subjective in nature in the bylaw. The units have to be secondary to the primary home. So, for example, with an attached additional unit or a detached unit was proposed that was significantly different in character than the main house or looked really out of place. That would be one thing we would look to be fixed before a building permit was issued. It should really be integrated into the design of the building for an attached unit. Just this is mainly covered through your building code anyways, but just to be clear, things like travel trailers and shipping containers would not be permitted to be used as additional dwelling units. We've also just clarified in the zoning bylaw, I'm sure you've seen around town, that there is increasing use of shipping containers for outdoor secure storage on some industrial and commercial properties. So although they could not be used for a dwelling unit, the bylaw is being clarified here a little bit just to allow some limited use of those things in industrial and commercial properties. And the last point on that slide is just that if you do have additional dwelling units in the dwelling or in a detached building, that there would be no home occupations or you watch the greenhouses permitted on the same property. That's just really trying to manage the amount of activity and parking and so forth that's happening on one lot. And next slide. I won't go through all these definitions in detail, but in order to clean up that basement versus cellar distinction in the current bylaw and add a definition for accessory dwelling units and the attached and detached version of them. There's some updated terms shown in the next 4 slides. You maybe skip ahead to short-term rental accommodations. This isn't directly related to the additional dwelling units, and this is specifically regulated in the Planning Act. But as we were amending the bylaw, and over the years, we have had some inquiries about short-term rental accommodations in residential areas of Shelburne. And those involve things like Airbnbs or Vrbo, people making all or part of a home available for short-term stays, usually less than 30 days. Could be for people visiting town, tourists, much more common in areas that have water from the beach area. The Scotias have a lot of these as well. They can create a bit of an issue if there's a big uptake on them because they make the housing less available for full-time accommodation for people who need a dwelling. And there are some other, considerations with them, such as, parking requirements and potential nuisance in the neighborhood. So we have proposed to make the bylaw clearer by adding a definition for short-term rental accommodations and also to require some parking space requirements for those. And if you skip ahead to the next slide, you can see in the bottom row of the table, To start off in a fairly conservative approach with short-term rentals, we're proposing that only the mixed-use residential commercial zone or C2 zone, which is immediately around the downtown, not the downtown core, but the blocks surrounding, would be the only place where those would be permitted. Because there are single and semi-detached dwellings permitted in that zone, even though there's also a mix of commercial activities there. The table also just shows the check marks where the different types of additional dwelling units would be permitted, whether they're within single detached dwelling, semi-detached and street townhouse. You can see the street townhouse would only be permitted in the R5 zone, that has limited application. That is definitely, as you can appreciate, the most difficult circumstance to try and accommodate more units. Often the street townhouse won't have enough parking to supply for additional units, so I don't think we'll see much of that happening. The single and semi-detached typically have a larger lot area, and then they can possibly accommodate some additional parking for the additional dwelling units. But we do have to permit them wherever we permit single, semi-detached and street townhomes, which is why they're permitted throughout all of these zones. And a quick diagram on the next slide. This just illustrates, you take an example from the older part of town. The lots are generally about 50 feet wide or 15 meters by 150 feet deep. And they typically have access on the main street and the secondary access from a lane behind. And that's actually probably the most opportune area for some of these additional dwelling units, because you can provide a separate parking space and driveway off the lane, in addition to any parking provided off the main street. So this illustration just shows how these standards would apply. In the light brown is shown where the detached additional dwelling unit could be located closer to the lane, 1.2 meters or 4 feet off the lot lines. And in combination with the detached garage, for example, would be no greater than 10% of the lot area. And then you can see it's a relationship to the main house where there could be one other unit in addition to the main house. And finally, the last slide just speaks briefly to some of the financial impacts. So it's important to keep in mind that any additional dwelling units that fall under these rules would not be subject to development charges, and that's a result of Bill 23 as well. There were some exemptions for these prior to Bill 23, but there were some size restrictions related to that. The change of Bill 23 is that there are no size restrictions for those exemptions, but the zoning regulations that we established here would still apply. So we did circulate a copy of the proposed bylaw to the required agencies and departments. We didn't receive any objections. We haven't received any public comments on the proposed bylaw, other than a number of inquiries of people wanting it to be in effect so they can move forward with their plan. It will save some time in the future because we won't have to come back to council and the committee every time somebody wants to convert based on the property and so forth. So there is some efficiency gained by having these rules in place. So I'll pause there. I'm happy to take any questions from council or from the public. Thank you. Perfect. Thanks.
Do we have to allow for Airbnbs?
No, you could provide short-term rental accommodations.
Being denied.
Yeah.
There's, I know areas like Toronto and whatnot where they are being allowed, there's been quite a few issues with Airbnbs. And it's quite a concern if we don't have to allow for them, why are we doing?
I think the general principle with that is if you don't allow them anywhere, they'll happen anyway and become an enforcement issue. And you obviously kind of take the most conservative approach where they'll have the least impact in a established mature residential neighborhood. For example, we wouldn't permit them, but in around the downtown, there's these mixed use areas where there's a mix of existing homes and businesses. So there's already a bit of a commercial flavor to the area in addition to residential. So those areas are maybe more well suited for some commercial accommodations. That could also support the downtown to some extent. Right now, there's no hotels, motels in Shelburne, so if somebody were here on business or needing to stay in the area, this would provide maybe some limited opportunity for that as well. We haven't had a lot of inquiries about them, so we haven't, it's not a huge concern. The option before council would be, I would recommend at least we define them, so that it's clear where they're permitted and where they're not. But if you'd rather not permit them in the C2 zone, that could be a change to the bylaw before it's approved, if that's council wish.
And the other issue I have, I know you're talking about parking one vehicle in the parking, well, we know we have issues already with parking quite a few places in town. And starting to put 3 apartments in a place where the issues with parking to begin with is quite a concern, and even with just one parking space being provided. How do we control, make sure that we don't end up with vehicles on lawns and every other place, because there's no real place for them to park.
Unfortunately, all we can require an applicant to do is show us a plan with at least 1 space per unit, and that those spaces are located where they're permitted to be in the zoning bylaw. If people, supply 2 parking spaces on the property and that's all they require, but then end up parking, on the front lawn or on the street or places they're not supposed to, that does become an enforcement issue. But the planning act behind us to only allow us to require 1 space per unit on the property where these units are located. Going forward in newer subdivision developments, and you've seen this in some of the recent condominium applications that have been drafted through, we have required, visitor parking areas. That is something that could be looked at, but really only in new development context. It's not an obvious place for those in existing subdivisions. But that's something that could be considered through future developments is having common parking areas. To provide additional outlet for overflow parking that can't be accommodated on the lot.
So I, in my walks around town, I've seen the driveways and some of the getting up the full line. And this provides all kinds of additional parking area. If you don't have one, you have a full driveway set all the way across. And the problem is regulation and enforcement. And it's the same thing with Airbnbs. We have an idea that it's an Airbnb in a subdivision, so enforcement doesn't matter what you do. Anyway, that's just a comment. Enforcement is going to become very different parts where it is even the sort of bylaw. I guess on the additional dwelling unit that you can put outside of the house. You don't have to have access to a side yard or road. You can still put a dwelling in the backyard as long as there's enough parking in driveway of the house, right on that lot.
That's correct, as long as there's enough room in the backyard to locate a building that can be big enough and tall enough to house a dwelling unit. You could put 10, and there's increasing availability of prefabricated tiny homes that could go in those kind of contexts. The 2 main challenges will be to make sure that parking is provided, but also that there's enough access in the side yard. So we recommended 4 feet to get through the side yard to the backyard, and that the distance from the main entrance from that attached building to the fire hydrant is no more than 90 meters. To provide fire protection.
So in my case, when I use my house as an example, I've got a 64-foot wide lot, 110 foot depth. And the fire hydrant's pretty close to the house nearby. I don't have access to the road, but I can't put a tiny house in my backyard, for example, if I wanted to for an elderly person. Quite easily because I have room for 4 vehicles to park in my driveway.
That's correct. That would allow. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of the short-term rentals, is there any requirement for those units to be registered at all?
There's no.
Or is there a way to do that?
I don't know if Kurt might be able to help me out here if they would require a business license. example? No. Some municipalities under the municipal act have established a licensing requirement, that can be done in their native zoning, and that provides for, periodic, typically an annual kind of check-in to make sure that they're operating in compliance with certain licensing restrictions. Communities like the mountains, they spend oodles of time and legal advice to get really robust licensing and zoning requirements in place, because they have proliferation of those kind of units. Other municipalities have just dealt with it through zoning and not through licensing. It's kind of one of those things you have to assess, administrative cost and effort required versus the severity of the issue. But that's certainly an additional tool that's available to council if you wanted to regulate it from beyond zoning.
And at this point, short of going on their road, private track, municipality.
Yeah, one of the downsides of the current bylaws as it's today is that, if someone is operating in neighborhood complaints, there's a bit of a gray area in terms of permissions, as the bylaw isn't explicit about it. By adding the definition that provides you with additional enforcement power, because you can clearly say, you define this use, this is what it means, and here's where it's permitted and not permitted. And if it falls outside of those parameters, then you can pursue enforcement. So I think it is important to have in the bylaw, whether you want to permit it anywhere or not. There is some case law out there, just as an aside, that if a zoning bylaw goes as far as prohibiting something throughout the community, that's not as strong a case as if you say, well, we permit it in one spot and can go there. Because, but if it's a blanket prohibition, that can be looked on or frowned upon by the OLT and the courts, because you're not allowing any opportunity for the use.
Any other questions received from council?
Thanks so much. So I guess just to sort of clarify, I guess for the public that might be watching, this would pertain to a single lot. So if there was a unit present on the lot already that had 3 apartments in it, for example, and then they wanted to put a separate dwelling on, they would have to split the lot in order to do that. Like they would have to apply for like a lot splitting type of thing in order to put a second dwelling on there, which would then house up to 3.
Yeah, these proposed provisions don't change the minimum requirements to create a lot.
Right.
So in order to create a lot for a new dwelling of any size, you need to meet the zoning requirements.
Okay.
The intent with these additional dwelling units is that they're either in the main house that's already existing or a new house that gets built and built part of that. And then the detached unit is on the same lot and will never be separate from the main house.
Okay.
But if you already have 3 units on a property, then yeah, there's no opportunity under these provisions to add a 4th. You have to, create another lot.
Create a separate lot. Okay. And that's what I thought. I was like, wanting sure that people understand that fact, right? That, because if we currently have something or something does get proposed to us, for example, people might not recognize that aspect that the lot is actually been separated so that it's possible to do that. So
It's an important point because the other type of application committee adjustments seen a lot of over the last few years is lot severances.
yes,
And those will continue to require those consent applications. This doesn't override that. This, if you want to create a new property for a brand new home, you still have to go through the consent process.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. Awesome, thank you.
And all of these additional dwellings, obviously, they're subject to the allocation.
Yes. There is I didn't put the details in my report, but there is a temporary allocation for still carried over from 2022, and there's an allocation report coming in the near future that will assess whether we can still make that full 10 cubic meters per day available for this type of thing. How much is remaining? So there's more to come on that.
But do we run into a situation, Steve, where somebody doesn't sever, drops a tiny home on, and then decides at a later date that they want to sever? Where does that?
They could try that. The problem would be 2 issues. They have to have public street frontage, and the laneways don't count
Right.
for that. So it'd have to be a corner lot situation, and in that case, that they could do that in the future. But that would be a limitation, but we'd have to have frontage on 2 streets.
Gotcha.
Any other council questions? Any questions from the public? Online. Alex, we have people logged in online. All right, well, if there are no more questions, so the recommendation is to receive the report. Provide for the reading of the bylaw number 14-2023, which is the bylaw to amend zoning bylaw number 30-2007 as amended by adding new provisions and definitions for pushing dwelling units. Move for a second to that. By Councilor Bernardo, seconded by Councilor Keegan. Further discussion on that? All in favor? Vote. Carried. Thanks, Steve. Hopefully that will clear up some issues that we're dealing with. Okay, next is public question period. Are there any questions from the public? Yes, sir. It's asking you to come up, state your name and address to record.
Mayor Wade Mills and Deputy Mayor Hall and Council, it's Jeremy Glass from 648 Main Street East, Shelburne. I just wanted a quick question, actually a couple more requests before the next council meeting on the 22nd. Just after our last council meeting with the requirements of having more police presence during the Shelburne Freedom Rally up there, which we fully support. Having the police presence up there really does help us defend ourselves against frivolous claims. I'm not saying that all the claims that are made against us are frivolous, but there is some frivolous claims, just blocking traffic and blocking sidewalks and, obscene gestures and language and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that there's never been an obscene gesture, but basically my request from the council is, you want the police there for, third eye view opinion of what's going on there, so you have a set of eyes. I'd like to request if any of the councilors here can maybe attend themselves the next freedom rally protest, come down and see for yourselves. Because what happens, we've had a poor picture painted of us ever since the freedom convoy to Ottawa. And when public officials continue to paint that poor picture of us, it creates kind of a modern day lynch mob. Since our last council meeting here, you would understand the stuff I've dealt with personally from that. Again, phone calls, messages, stuff stolen off my property. And we have had police presence at every rally pretty much, and they paint a much different picture than what the public is painting of us, or some of the public, I should say. I'm sure, as you know, it's a lot of these claims are coming from the same people over and over again. I just think it would be good. We're just teachers, nurses, some of us are even police officers or politicians down there. We're just the public. And if you, council, deputy mayor would come down and see us yourselves, maybe you'd be able to reassure some of these people that are calling, that are afraid to come up in town and say, hey, we've been down there for ourselves. It's really not as bad as it seems, rather than, kind of feeding that biased opinion. So basically what I'm asking is just a request of all of you, if you have a chance, come down and meet us for yourselves. That way you can give them a good opinion from your own observations, rather than give them an opinion from other observations. So like I say, it's just a request. There's nothing forcing you to come down, but you've had the police come down, as a third eye view, you've had detectives come in the past to see how we behaved, and you've got good reports back from them, so. Again, I've had some bias things from people that this table up there by food jesters, towards us. So I can't speak for everybody that's out there, but I can speak for the majority of us. We're good people that are just trying to get across a good message. I like to think that people are so afraid of us, but more afraid of our speech, what we have to say.
Okay, so, yeah, thank you. And as you know, I think you have invited or have been invited to our next meeting, which is on the 27th.
Yeah, I just wanted to get this out before the 27th too, that's what I think, just to give you that request, that maybe a couple of you would have a chance to come to our next one before the 27th. And then you'd be able to speak on it as well,
So that would be one of the,
the 25th, yeah.
all right, thank you, sir.
All right, well, thank you for your, have a great day.
Any other questions? Okay. On to our presentations. We have two presentations this evening. The first is from some representatives from Headwaters Healthcare Center. Tim Bell, I'm president, going to be the primary presenter. I can on you.
Thank you.
I'll let you do the call.
Okay. Yes, good evening, Mayor Mills and Council. Thank you for having me. I am joined this evening with my esteemed colleagues who, if you have any hard questions at the end, I'm going to defer to them. So I've got Tom Reed, who's Chief of Veteran at EMS with me, and Jennifer Hamilton, who's our Director of Stakeholder Relations and Communications. So I think you guys have received the slides in advance, so I'm just going to touch on some highlights and then more than happy to answer questions at the end. And thank you again for having me. So, you know, the first slide is a picture of some award winners at Headwaters, and I always start off all my presentations and delegations by acknowledging the true heroes at Headwaters, which are our staff, physicians, volunteers, and these ones in particular were nominated by their peers for various reasons, all living our values. And so I just again want to acknowledge and thank our staff. They come to work each and every day, and they are really the heroes. We're here to support anyone that comes through our doors. The next slide was just our strategic plan, which we're moving into our final year of the strategic plan. So it still guides all of our work. We are going to be embarking this next year on creating a new strategic plan. So you're going to be hearing a lot more from us as we gather feedback and input into a new one. But certainly the values down the right, our strategic directions down the left are still guiding us for this next year. And really, the main purpose of my presentation this evening is to review stats from our last annual report. You're going to be getting our new one in the next couple of months, but I wanted to highlight just how busy the hospital was over the last year. So just some key highlights. Certainly, our diagnostic imaging department has been very busy doing lots of tests, and we're certainly working on getting our wait times down and our wait list down, which is a result of the pandemic. As well, our lab was very busy, and our lab was certainly busy, still completing lots of COVID assessment and COVID tests over the last year, which that has unfortunately decreased as well. And then our surgeries, day surgeries, inpatient visits, all of that is ramping up back to pre-COVID volumes, which is really, really nice to see. And of course, you see there all of our areas of care that we provide at Headwaters. The next slide I just share with you, I think you're all familiar with the catchment area that Headwaters serves, of which Shelburne is one of our towns and areas, but there are 10 areas that we serve primarily. And there are also areas outside of those 10 communities that still come to Headwaters, but I did want to share that just as FYI. And then the next few slides really highlight a plan that we have just completed. So we've updated our clinical priorities plan for Headwaters. And what that is that's a plan now looking at the next 5 years. And what we did is we did an inventory of all the current services and areas of care that we provide at Headwaters. We evaluated them to ensure that they're still providing great care, that there's enough volumes, are they the right services. Then we looked at all of the population projections for across all the communities a few years out, many years out actually, looking at who's moving into the area, what are the types of services we need to plan for that we are currently providing. And what came out of that, if you look on the next slide, a couple of key highlights. So the age ranges of 20 to 29 and 65 plus are the two cohorts that are growing most rapidly across our communities. So those are really the ages that we need to plan for. So you are going to see an enhanced focus on geriatric services and as well really focusing on our young families. Of course, which I'm sure Shelburne is privy to with all the growth that you guys are experiencing. So those are some key areas of focus. We gathered feedback on what are our strengths, what are other areas of opportunity. And then just to highlight, we looked at some of the stats. So, within our catchment area, 77% of those patients come to Headwaters for their surgery. And 84% of our emergency department visits come from patients within those 10 communities. Of course, we see others come from other communities, and of course, some of our residents, go to other hospitals, probably because we don't provide that service at Headwaters, or it's also due to referral patterns often by physicians. Just the next slide is just some stats in regards to Shelburne residents and what services they receive at Headwaters and what that looks like. So you can see in terms of inpatients and outpatients, the percentage of patients that came to us from Shelburne, just as an FYI. And just on the bottom area there on the right, you can see that 50% of Shelburne residents come to Headwaters for day surgery, and 68% of Shelburne residents come to us for emergency department support. So the next few slides just really provide some highlights into some of the investments or really exciting initiatives that the hospital implemented over the last year. So in regards to our people, our primary focus right now is on our people. So coming out of the pandemic, now more than ever, we need to support all of our staff, physicians, volunteers. We're there to serve everyone that walks through our door. We do that through our people, so we have to make sure that we take care of them and we invest in them. So we created a people strategy with input from all of them. That's a multi-year plan again, really looking to support, ensure that we continue to recruit. Obviously, you've heard a lot in the media around the health human resources crisis out there. That's national, in fact, probably international. At Headwaters, it's a big focus for us. We're doing fairly well with getting our vacancy rates down, but we also want to retain all the good people that we have. So we've got a huge focus on that. You can see all the different initiatives that we've done across. We're always looking at other creative solutions and ways. We're looking at international trained nurses. We've got a physician assistants. We're really honestly looking at anything and everything, ensuring that we support all of our people at Headwaters. In regards to quality of care, there's a number of really exciting accomplishments. So we have successfully completed our first phase of our accreditation. So that was a virtual accreditation, and then we're just preparing now for them to come on site this fall at Headwaters. So that's exciting. Our lab and pharmacy teams also underwent successful accreditations, which is very intensive. We've also implemented some more in-house training, again, focusing on our people, our staff, what we can do. We've also made some really big investments in terms of providing safer care at the hospital. So we just implemented automatic dispensing units. That's where medication is housed and locked, and the door only released now when there's proper scanning of patient armbands and arm codes, and it's all automatic now. So really decreasing any patient medication errors. And there's a number of other enhancements and extra equipment that we've added at the hospital to again improve patient experience and quality of care. In each presentation that I do, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge an amazing hospital foundation team who raises through community support and community members a lot of donations to help us purchase the equipment that the hospital needs. The hospital equipment is not something that is funded by the Ministry of Health. A lot of folks don't realize that and know that we're funded for the nurses and the services in the hospital, but not the equipment. So we rely on our foundation, and they are very valuable partners. And our volunteers as well. So we were able to welcome them back in person across the hospital, and they really are an extension of our staff and our team. They provide a great resource, and we're happy to have them back. And then there's a number of other volunteers at the hospital that maintain our gardens, our spiritual care team. So we're always very pleased, and I definitely want to acknowledge them. In regards to our hospital campus and the building itself, we continue to do many upgrades. Our hospital building itself is 25 years old now. We celebrated our 25th year anniversary last year. And so with that comes a 25-year-old roof, windows, boilers, all the stuff inside the hospital. So we're doing many upgrades inside and out. You can see some of those listed on the slide there. And then the next slide, again, is a really important one, and it's to acknowledge all of our community connections. So the hospital is part of our Ontario Health team with many other partners, which is exciting. And then, of course, through various times of the year, we partnered with Public Health. We always partner with them on different initiatives. Our assessment center did move off-site from the hospital with our partners at the Veterinary Family Health Team. We're really pleased about a partnership we have with Dr. OPP, a mobile crisis response team. That was the one-time funding that we received. And of course, we try to get out, such as tonight, to speak with our partners and answer questions. Looking ahead, so of course, there's lots of exciting things on our radar. A couple of the big ones I want to highlight. I'll talk about the MRI in a minute. That one's really exciting, but something that's really exciting and really needed for the hospital is the creation of an updated master program and plan. So what that is now that we've done our clinical priorities plan and we know some of the services and areas we need to build up over the next few years, we're also going to do another scan of all of the current services. So as an example, our emergency department was built 25 years ago to serve 24,000 visits annually. We're up to 40,000 visits annually. So we know the space is not big enough. That's just one program and service that goes across the hospital. We know our obstetrics unit is growing, is under a lot of pressure. We need to expand. So we're going to bring in experts that are going to map out all the services and they're going to map it out to what are the current regulations around square feet for the volumes we're seeing. And then architects will come in and then map out, we need to expand up, out. What does that look like? Where do programs or departments need to potentially move to enable a better patient experience? Because anytime we go to the ministry now with a capital submission, they ask for a current master plan and program. So now that we have an MRI coming, which is very exciting, we just wanted a permanent space for that. I'll talk about the interim solution in a minute, but it's a good time to look at the entire hospital because our last master plan program is 20 years old. So we're going to be doing that over the next fiscal year, which really is, to me, is Headwaters 2.0. What do the next 25 years look like? How do we best plan for that rather than doing Band-Aid solutions? Funding is limited, and so I'd like to do it right. I'd like to do it right once and plan for that, plan for the future growth of the hospital. And you can see some other programs and renewals there. But the next couple slides are just about the MRI. Really exciting for our hospital and our community. So we are working with a number of other hospitals that got awarded funding for an MRI. And just to clarify, it's the operational funding to operate the MRI that we're receiving for 5 days a week. Of course, the funding now to purchase MRI, something that our foundation is going to help us with. So that is underway, but in regards to how soon will we be doing MRI scans at Headwaters? So our hope and the anticipated date is this time next year. We hope to be doing MRI scans. The MRI, we plan to purchase the permanent MRI in the next year, and then we're going to house it in a temporary location while the master program and plan is completed. So we are looking at the one slide we included in there is a modular solution. So these are kind of prefab. You're probably more familiar with that than we are, but that's the option we're looking at now. The permanent MRI will go in there. We'll start doing scans as soon as possible. And then once we have determined a permanent location for that, then we'll potentially move it if we need to move it, if that's not the location, and go from there. So that is really exciting. Of course, there's lots of procurement and steps to jump through that, and in regards to a ministry approval for a temporary location, but all really exciting. And then just to finish off, I do hope that you all know how to get in touch with us, how to give us feedback. If you're looking for volunteer opportunities, want to be a patient and family advisor, we are open and welcome to any and all participation. I want to thank you for having me here tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Jim.
Good question. We have a lot of people within our community that have difficulty traveling down to the hospital for X-rays and MRI and things of that nature there. What we do to create something like that within the community here, we're experiencing, issues that are up here.
That's a great question, Counselor. What would it take? I think it would take a really solid business case. Just as an example to highlight, so I know there's a lot of interest in Caledon, East Caledon, that there's land that the region owns. They also like to set up an urgent care center or offer some sort of medical services there. So, you know, you need a hospital sponsor, so obviously I think you're looking at Headwaters, and then it would need to be a robust business case that goes in to the ministry to, you know, obtain the necessary approvals. So there needs to be a critical mass. You know, the volumes to accommodate whatever type of service you want to bring here.
So, follow-up question, and this is, I'm not sure. There's a business plan. I'm not sure that can be done, but the critical mass, how do we go about getting that kind of information? We go to our family doctors, we get that kind of information, like, I'm just curious, how do we get it?
Well, I think you would be looking at population projections, but it's never good to answer a question, to ask me a question, but let me ask you a question. So is travel, is that the biggest reason, is that the problem you're trying to solve?
It's part of the problem. We've got the family doctors up here, we've got people that maybe have husbands, for example, that work outside the town, but the wife does not work and has children at home and whatnot.
Yeah.
And hasn't got a vehicle to get around. She may be able to get to the local doctors here in town, but not necessarily from that point on, get to the hospital for an X-ray, for example, or something as a follow-up. We have the lab up here, so they can get blood work done, but like I said, there's no potential for X-ray or anything of that nature there. So that's where I'm coming from with this question here.
Yeah, I think, you know, a transportation solution is probably a good interim step for sure. That's tricky. Transportation is tough, right? That's tricky for sure.
Yeah, I know that is tough. I'm questioning if we can have it available within a community. We have to make a business case to critical mass where I think I don't want to, but. Okay. I'll let you.
Sure. My question is very similar, actually, and I see the need for more facilities. Obviously, Headwaters, as much as I hate to admit it, my family typically goes to Alliston anytime that we have emergencies, simply because the service times there, the triage times are much faster.
Yeah.
So I do see Headwaters as potentially overburdened, especially in the emergency department.
Yeah.
So what could we do? Like, how do we establish even some kind of a small emergency room in this community? Like, is there something beyond a business plan and just doctors who are willing to run it? Or how do we as council help expedite that? Because if we were able to implement something like that, obviously that would alleviate some of the stress on Headwaters, alleviate some of the stress on Alliston as well, but certainly be a benefit.
Yeah, so I don't have an official answer, but I'm gonna tell you probably some of the reality. So and you nailed it on the head, right? So we know that folks from Shelburne go to other Stevenson Headwaters. I think it was Humber and the fourth one. I forget what it was. I have it in my email. We ran stats, so we know that we're one of four. Yeah, there you go, right? So the chances of getting a new hospital here are very slim. I think that's because the vicinity, the travel distances for folks here are close to many hospitals. So the alternative, and I think the first line of approach the ministry looks at, is expanding. So for example, us, we know we're gonna expand our ED. So we have to grow and get bigger. Same with Stevenson, they've got a big expansion, same with the other hospitals. That's the reality. I know it's what you don't want to hear, but it's gonna be expansions, right? It's tough, right? But that, you know, rather than, you know, another smaller hospital coming here, they're gonna look to expand and grow existing hospitals too.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if maybe I can follow up then. I know that some of the doctors that we have in town have expressed an interest in having an after-hours clinic or a better facility than what they already have. What can Headwaters do to help us help them? Or would Headwaters be willing to partner with them in some capacity in order to help them achieve what they're looking for as well?
So I think that's tricky again. So that's primary care, right? So our job is acute care. Our job is for patients come into the hospital, walk through our doors to serve them, right? And we will never, you know, send anyone away. That's a different kind of system. That's primary care. That's funded through the Ontario, you know, Medical Association, funded with the Ministry of Health, directly with them. So how could the hospital help with that? I'm not really sure, right? I mean, do we support it? Of course, do we, you know, the more care they provide, the less potentially it comes to our merge, so it's a win-win-win. Obviously, we support that. It's, yeah, I mean, I know Dr. Katang, I know the folks that are here, amazing, right? It's amazing that if what else services they do here, that's great. I mean, any way we could support them, we would. But again, that's not our business.
No, I understand. So
Yeah.
there's nothing that. you
Not
know,
really.
Potentially that.
No, right? So we're trying to grow our services and our space and our footprint and to alleviate the wait times and all of that, because we want to do a better job serving too. Yeah, but we'll support, I mean, we support for sure, right? I mean, yeah.
Yeah, just a quick question. Have you, are there plans to approach the ministry for, funding for the MRI beyond 5 days a week?
Yes, there will be. So there, so 100%. So once we've done the stats, we know 5,000 people leave our area to have MRIs done annually. So, I mean, we, you know, running it 24 hours a day, 5 days a week is more like, we won't be able to serve that volume if it comes. So once, I mean, essentially, again, we've got to build a business case. Once we're running, you know, maximizing our operating dollar, we start to have a big wait list, and that's the first thing. We're gonna have the data that we need to expand our funding so we can run 7 days a week, hopefully 24 hours a day. Yes. Yes, absolutely. It is very exciting.
In that modular location here, mentioned this, and I'm sorry, but it'd be located on the.
Hospital property, yeah, we're thinking right now, like somewhere close to the emerge, like, there's a lot of thinking and planning right with electricity, power, all of that, so yes, it'll be on hospital grounds. Adjacent, like attached to a door in a building, so staff too don't wanna, we looked at a trailer, they don't wanna be in a trailer, it's not a good patient experience either, so we wanna make it as seamless as possible. That'll be our space as well in the future, right? So if you have that modular, then it's our space, which is a good thing, so we also want it to be good.
One more question, in regard to the hospital itself. The hospital, when you say the expansion, are you also looking at where patients currently be in care? That may, I guess, of the patients, weeks. Are you
Yes,
looking
they
at
have-
expanding that area as well because with the population growth? I'm gathering, especially on one of those that are 12 to 60 point. And imagine we'll probably end up in some hospital somewhere. But I want.
We're gonna look at all of it, all
Yes.
services, all programs.
All
Yes.
programs.
Yes.
As well as the hospital area
Yes.
itself.
Yes.
To accommodate them.
Yes, so we just need to gather again, all the data, all the specs, all the requirements, all that, and then we've got to go through a whole capital campaign, and I've got to go get approvals from the ministry.
So
Everything we do, this is a multi-year thing.
So you'd be gathering up the population growth, for example. like
Yes.
Africa is projecting along.
Yes, we have all that now, we did that for our clinical priority plan, so we have that. And Shelburne is still the fastest growing town in that area. Yeah. All right, thank
Thank
you,
you, Kim.
thanks for having me, thank you.
Okay, thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, our next presentation is on behalf of Dufferin County Multicultural Foundation. We have Elvia Ali. How are you?
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me today. So I have a presentation here. So I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the history of the multicultural and one of you who already know it and have been at the event and part of the paper.
Can I get you four down?
Right.
There we go.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Do you want me to start all over? Yeah, first part?
We could hear
All right, so I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the history of the multicultural event. So the idea came around in 2017 where we started working in the schools, so multicultural events. And then in 2018, we held a in-person event at the local library, the Shelburne Library, for the entire community. In 2019, it doubled in size, and it not only served Shelburne, but all of Dufferin County. 2020, we had to kind of pivot to something virtual because of the pandemic, but then it was also quite a success. In 2021, we actually also had it virtual, and we, in partnership with the Museum of Dufferin, had a panel discussion, and we held something called the Dufferin Paladin Multicultural Award, which really showcased individuals in the community who have worked really hard to bring community together, who have volunteered countless hours, and it really highlighted them for all of their work. In 2022, we actually became a registered nonprofit. It was we also held our first in-person, again, multicultural event, which was one of the largest events that we ever held. And it really showcased a lot of the different cultures from within Dufferin County. We also had a piece of the multicultural event where we showcased cultural art, and those were from artists all across Ontario. And those art pieces were housed in the Dufferin the Museum of Dufferin. And it stayed for, I believe it was a month after the event ended. It was still being showcased there. So for 2022, not only did we have a multicultural event, but we had various different workshops. And we also had various different cultural and religious days throughout the year that we recognize. We had workshops such as the People Garden, where there was a planting workshop with families and youth, where we had the opportunity to teach families and youth the importance of eating healthy, how to grow their own plants, and they actually took care of the plants throughout the summertime. We actually rented a spot from the garden, the Shelburne Garden. We also had a youth cooking class in September of last year, so it was kind of tied to our gardening workshop, where the youth harvested all of the herbs and vegetables and fruits, and they actually learned how to prepare a meal. They actually made ratatouille with the help of Chef Freddy at Beyond the Gates. So it was a wonderful event, and there was a lot of really good feedback from it. We also supported quite a number of different initiatives in 2022, such as the Sikh Heritage Month flag raising, the Dufferin Cultural Resource Circle, Three Sisters gardening ceremony, the Dufferin Muslim Center Eid, and again, the Dufferin County Cultural Resource Circle beading workshop, as well as the Memorial Walk for Residential Schools. We supported the Shelburne Cricket Club, the Dufferin County Cricket Club, and much more. So now for 2023, we have actually started planning for the 2023 event with the Museum of Dufferin yet again. Currently, we are accepting entries for the art exhibit that will be held there. So it's the cultural art exhibit. And we have expanded the multicultural event to a 2-day event. So it will be on the 23rd, the evening of the 23rd, with the opening of the art gala. And then we will have the full day event on the 25th. Our foundation is actually asking the Shelburne Council if you would be interested in becoming a partner with us and donating $300 to the foundation and allowing us to as we did last year, place your logo with a clickable link to the town's website, as well as have our link on the town website, so that people in the town know that we are here to support them and to support us in the multicultural events. So whether it be digital advertising or social media advertising. And we're also asking if June 27 can be proclaimed multicultural day as well, and we can raise the unity and diversity flag in June. I know last year we did, and as with many years so far, we've split it with the pride flag. So usually the pride flag takes the first to the fifth, the 14th, I think we did. And then the 15th would end, we did it for multicultural events. So that is our ask. Does anyone have any questions?
The question from you. So I have one, I mean, this has grown, you know, in many ways from the first sort of humble days when you got started in the library. And kudos to you for sort of shepherding that growth. Because it has sort of become more of a county-wide initiative now, and certainly recognized at a county level. Have you approached other municipalities, or are you going to approach other municipalities
Yes,
for support as well?
yes.
Denise just raised a good point. In the last couple of years, we have had to split them on with pride. Because we only had the one flagpole, we actually have an extra flagpole now. So we should be able to avoid that. So we can have that little flags up for the configuration. If you don't need credit. All right. Then I have a motion to see the presentation. Even second by Jennifer Hall. Okay, thank you. We'll be back.
Thank you. I will be with you.
All right, any council inquiries tonight before we jump in? Council Dean.
You have one, actually. This is, notice, sorry, Matt. No, this is notice motion. Okay, wrong one, sorry, all right.
Are you-
You know, it's.
You're just awfully excited.
I am absolutely.
Any other requirements? All right, so on to our reports. Our first report is from our county planner. We talked about the consent agreement for the residential lot severance at 250 Main Street.
Thank you, Mayor. So these reports are very similar. I will address them just quickly one at a time. So P 22305 and the corresponding bylaw 15-223 relate to consent P 2201, which is the 250 Main Street East. So that's a corner lot with the existing home lot at the northwest corner of James Street and Main Street. And the consent and we were approved for that lot on May 30th to create a new second lot for a single detached dwelling. The applicant has advanced their plans for that lot and have produced a lot grading and servicing plan with all the detailed plans for the lot. The condition number 3 of that provisional consent requires the owner to enter into a consent agreement with the town. The consent agreement is in the agenda and it's ready for council consideration. It's very similar to all the previous consent applications. The main difference is with this application and the next one on the agenda, there was a little bit more consideration to how we could make sure the design of the dwelling is well integrated into the heritage part of the community. And so there are 2 components to that. There's some design guidelines that have been included in the schedule for the agreement. And there's a heritage committee review component that hasn't occurred yet, but will occur before the building permit is issued to get heritage committee comments on the proposed dwelling design. The owner has reviewed the agreement and has signed it back and is satisfied with it. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions about my report or the agreement. Thank you.
Questions?
I'm glad that we're looking at what's going on with this class of the area. We unfortunately saw that one of the consent agreements for what was put up was a little different in character to the area, so I'm not glad that put it in the agreement, and it does fit the area other than that issue. Yes.
In that case, I have a motion to CUC report and provide a bylaw to drop our existing into consent agreements. Our goals.
Second one is really the same for 307 Victoria Street. That was a provisional consent for the property at the southeast corner of Victoria Street and Center Street. The new lot will front on Center Street. The consent agreement is virtually the same. The design guidelines refer to the same requirements. It will be a period to continue review. That applicant hasn't solidified their plans yet for the new dwelling, but is kind of progressing through the conditions to clear them off so that the lot can be created and home be built in the future. So that agreement is related to consent E2202, which was approved conditionally on June 27th, 2022, along with the rezoning for that severed lot. And bylaw 16-2023 attaches the agreement that ready for council consideration. And the owner has the owners in that case have signed that agreement back and forth.
We're second then for the issues, the surety, second by Stephen. All right, thanks, Steve. Steve Robbins. Okay, next is our CAA report. During our weekend.
Thank you very much. This is just an update on the status of our reinstatement of the weekend transfer effective first of this year. At the last, in the January meeting, council had supported as part of the draft budget consideration that for the weekend transit service be reinstated and agreed to, that we could also reconstitute the service model, whereby we would be having a 5-hour loop on each day in Shelburne, and we would increase the number of stops. The evaluation for increasing the number of stops was actually quite the undertaking. So we've gone from 4 to 14. We're quite happy about that. We think that we've got the majority of the community covered. The loop will be 30 minutes. So we will start and end in 30 minutes. So particularly if you're going to certain parts of the town to acquire services like groceries or other, I guess, food services, that should help you. Council had asked us to review a dedicated spot in the plaza. A number of reports have outlined that unfortunately that's not possible because of the private property area that we would be entering. And additionally, so the roads are 4 ways to the muddy town of Shelburne. The liability for Great County and their operators to drive on them, as well as the tenants, is unfortunately a restriction we'll have to work around. So we do hope to have a subset of those roads most likely in the fall of this year. And when that does happen, we will change one of the other stops to make it at 14. You may ask why not 15. The routing is driven by making it in 30 minutes. And of course, it's very important to speed limit. And it just really would complicate the planning to get back to those data and then back to come down if we sort of created another spot. So the intent is to have the agreement that you have before you and bylaw tonight approved. With that, we can proceed with moving forward and getting on marketing, which the majority of that will be done by the town. Great County is changing this for us, whereby it will not be the service we have to pre-request and prepay. Given how many stops we have, and that there's 10 times per day that bus, minibus will be at that location, the times will be posted on the signage of each stop. So the person who's waiting for the bus will then be aware that I might have just missed it or just be coming, but there's no point with this volume of service to require you to pre-book. And we're going to test this model for this year. If it certainly doesn't work, we probably will know within the first 5 months and we can regroup. But at this point, we think that this is far more accessible, more responsive to what the community needs, and it's cash only basis. So we're hoping that everybody will have some tuiles and lease to make up that $5, because the driver is not going to be able to make a lot of change. So really, that's a part of the report. I think, I think the council will be happy with the expanded number of stops. I think the community will be as well. And we'll certainly do a quarterly check-in on this so that well in advance of the next budget. An understanding of how well this is received in the community is understood. The agreement does have the flexibility to do an extension as well as the termination, but certainly what Grey County has asked, that if we were going to extend at a minimum of 2 months, we looked at to give them enough time to understand the extension, the plans associated with that, as well as their capacity for the drivers and everybody else being able to service. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
So first and foremost, is that for exceptional work on this, that's very good. One question I have for you is in regards to the route. It looks like the bus is going to be turning around at the CRC, is that what?
No.
Okay.
So it may look like the map, so.
Short answer.
So, okay, so it goes from 14 to 1. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 14, it goes back up and starts again.
Right, so with 14, I'm assuming that's pretty much at CRC.
Yeah, so there's 4 stops that overlap currently. So the 14 stop is the current stop. At the CRC. The current stop is the one by Town Hall. We have a current stop on Simon at School Road, and we had added an additional stop at the end of School Road, County Road 11. So where we have to be very prescriptive is not to confuse the weekday rider with the weekend. It's going to be separate times to this. The weekday, nothing changed with weekday service. So those 4 stops we currently have will remain twice a day, and those will continue on to Orange Shop. Those are still going to be on call on demand and pre-pay if you choose. The weekend is specific to us, so we were able to have more flexibility in how we structure it. So it's not turning around at CDRC, it just keeps going back up and it moves constantly.
Right, so that it'll take the stop at CRC and come back around to South Point.
At one, yes. Yeah, so yeah. So if you want to ride it all day.
Yeah, I understand, but I don't, when you go from 13, you're going back to Owen Sound in Washington area, correct? You go to
So-
14.
You're going,
I'm looking at,
so in 11,
I'm looking at 13, it's at, looks like it's at the corner of Robert and it goes up past the fire hall. And it burns along the apples.
it's called the 14. Where it's,
Yeah, no, what I'm thinking is, why would it not go down Robert Street up Park to 14 and then that's continuous loop without going sort of back and up?
I don't know.
It goes down Park now because I see it during the day when they're going to Orangeville. So I don't understand why it would.
The driver may sort of.
Yeah. So,
It stops when training.
The soft and things, it's just the way the road is set up, and it's a little stupid. If I can put it.
Well, and it's, I think the council's being, the way the route is laid out, would require a lot of turn and senior parking lot. The way the council did not open the guys, it's a good sound, it goes straight out and heading west on the other part.
And go back to one and do the proper road. That's, I think, what we're.
so the only thing is not, and we build around with it. The schedule and the bylaws all for a reason, because they have to know that we've approved that for a while.
Yeah.
Insurance.
Well, it's not.
But certainly, if we have to tweak and get sure there's no consumers should be on the 14, we'll figure that out as we go.
Yeah, no, I'm quite happy with it. I think it should make people a lot easier for the people in the community to get to the shop and do what they're doing. I get it. Thank you. you for all the work you've done to get it.
Just to clarify, we did, obviously, we're aware, but it gets a little warmer coming April, the walking distance from the corner of 89. Once you get off at Simon School Road and County Road 11. There is another grocery store right across the street from that location, so if that's what you're needing, in terms of that or weekend pharmacy where there's closed on Sunday. We certainly want to recognize that long established business as well as being of access to the community. As part of our outreach campaign for those people that are walking, we certainly will encourage them to buy those little grocery strollers and anything else that can help them in the interim until we can get right into the Zoom road so that you literally would walk off the street into the new plaza. But again, we don't want to forget that we have another business at that other corner that provides significant volume of grocery support for our community, and that will be very accessible from this location.
That was going to be my next question. When do this? If this is still operating, that, for that, we can extend that and maybe do another stop in there.
Yeah, so we would have to, our plan would be to stop on the town road that we own. We are looking at whether we would be at our pumping station for the turnaround there. We want to get to as close to one of those entrances as possible, most likely the second entrance, because that's where the stores are and there's standard or sort of dedicated sidewalk in front of the stores. And then the person would walk out 30 minutes later and hop on, return or an hour later to that, but as close as we're going to get.
Perfect. All right, well, that's good news. Some concern people have a lot of the shops being migrated. That out of town. So. Okay, I have a motion then to receive the report, to accept the memorandum of understanding and provide for the enactment of the bylaw which authorizes us to enter into and secretary. So, Councilor Donato, second by Councilor Wagner. All in favor? All right. Thank you. Okay, next is the report from our Director of Legislative Services regarding a proposed countywide telecommunications system.
Thank you, and for your worship to my council. I'm going to receive a potential modernization grant to the public safety system within that department as a whole. Boardwalk has solicited position sessions with fire departments and municipalities. These sessions identify gaps in the current plan and will elaborate here. The presentation attached to the report as was presented to Shelburne Fire Board and the result of that discussion about the provided because it's not finalized yet. So the current communication systems are about to be fragmented. The current communication systems are found to be fragmented and lacking the ability to provide seamless communications between services, emergency services. The countywide universal telecommunications system, including a public safety broadband network, would allow for continuous and reliable telecommunications for fire departments and emergency services. An updated system would provide redundancy in the event of system failure to ensure telecommunications are protected during situations such as surges and disasters. There are multiple funding opportunities that the municipalities can apply for, which are listed in the report. It may take several years to establish a universal telecommunications system in Tucson. It is therefore important to commence discussion in a timely manner, including upon funding. The town of Orangeville will be moving forward with this project in 2023 and is looking to identify municipalities that may be interested in pursuing a joint venture. And so this report simply is wondering if the council is interested in pursuing further opportunities.
Questions for that? Okay.
I'll just make comments. I've got a lot of friends in emergency services, and I know that one of the complaints that consistently come up is not complaints, but one of the struggles is communications with dispatch. The fact that ambulance has their own dispatch, fire has their own dispatch, police have their own dispatch, and because they work so closely together, the comment is always been made, why do you not have central singular dispatch? And it's something that I know that a lot of my personal friends in the services have always said this is absolutely something that is very, very good. And so to me, this is certainly something that we should pursue.
My comment is whenever dispatch will be, they have no dispatch, we look at when about the fire board, we talking to the fire chief, we look at, there are a few scans and currently within the system. Public works, their own communication does not communicate with necessarily with the fire department, does not communicate. And when we have storms on the roads and whatnot, there was, especially the last big storm at Christmas time, the gaps really showed up with communication. So I think we need to pursue this. And apply for whatever we can get monies for it. And not only the fire department, but the municipality workers themselves need to have communication. And how they the county can look at the paramedic part. But if we are all on the same board and communicating the same way, then at least when we have these big events that do come by, we will have more as time goes on. In one form or another because of climate change. I think that we should be prepared at some point where we saw support that we want. Yeah, go ahead.
I just need to clarify, I appreciate the comment of the adoption, but let's just total the adoption to is the mobile land communication. So for example, in 4 departments, attend fire, what happens if their ability to communicate to one another is completely impacted by the systems which they're utilizing. So what this would do is it would actually remove those barriers by ensuring that they all share the same system and therefore can communicate to one another on site. And so that's what it's called, it's the land mobile radio system. And when each area has its own, when they're brought together and there's incident command and there's also relief, it's very challenging, if not impossible, unless I think you gave sort of an example that one department has to run the other department with walkie-talkies so that they can actually communicate and using personal cell phones, which is another problem. But just the reality of bringing all of these regional departments together, which happen often, particularly in more structure fires or in the or any other kind of emergency regionally. Just wanted to clarify.
Well, I appreciate that, and actually my comment was still looking the same based on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any question that the issue is real. And as Council Donato knows, this is something that's been discussed for a long period of time. A former fire chief had advocated a different sort of solution to this about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
At that time, there was some consensus as that proposed solution, but it didn't seem to be broad consensus across the county. So it kind of went nowhere in a hurry, unfortunately. With this particular solution, Chief Snyder did seem to indicate that it is being put with the other fire chiefs in the county. This seems to be something that everybody is kind of aligned, at least the principal would say. It probably has some legs to it, and depending on funding, logistics, and everything else, if we can get it up and running, this problem will address the lion's share of the concern we have. So yeah, I'm certainly in favor of looking into this further. One tweak I'm going out for the simply is the words in principle. We support the principle, the concept of this, and I know that means. But I want to be careful that we're not obligating or committing ourselves until we have kind of a fuller picture of what this might look like, or what the relevant contributions and how like these. Definitely, I think it's worth further investigation. I just want to proceed cautious. That's what we suggested, and then I will leave to otherwise. Favor? Okay, next is the memo from our review committee regarding board and committee application appointments. So the committee, I think ahead of schedule, has provided us with a memo containing their list of recommendations for appointments for various boards and committees for this term. Does anybody from the committee want to speak to it? Deputy Mayor Hall?
Again, there was a tremendous response from the community with regards to a variety of different positions that were being asked for. So going through the process, it was not easy by any means. But I think what we've got before you is a very good list of individuals to serve on each of the communities. And, you know, for those that have not been chosen, we certainly believe that whether it be subcommittees or support for some of the items, there's certainly looks like a very plentiful list of support or hands that may be able to participate. But again, very tough situation and maybe to draw the numbers to what we were requiring. But a great list of names.
Well, I certainly appreciate the work that maybe put into this, because I know that when the initial list we had, the list of recommendations we had, there was a lot of work in between point A and point B. But one of the things, I mean, without having done a deep dive in any of the applications, one of the things that stands out to me, which I like, is that we see kind of a good mix of some familiar names, you know, people who have been around and been involved before at various levels, as well as new ones. So it's good to see that, you know, we're going to have a mix of some experience, along with some new and fresh ideas. Hopefully, new members of the community get well or get involved. So, why I certainly like the look of that in terms of the composition. Other thoughts? Okay. If not, then I'll entertain a motion to receive the report and provide the reading and enacting of the bylaw to make the appointments official. Board.
Right. Okay. Why don't we get started?
Rose from the library. Or pick a couple.
So it's safe to say we can start in April? Good, okay.
They're official now, right?
Yeah, so,
There we go.
all right.
All right, next is proclamation request regarding Save the Soil. So the actual request is contained in the agenda. Not a lot of those. March 21st, I guess, is the date that's been identified as this individual's Save the Soil Day. Yeah, any thoughts on this? I mean, this is a new one. I think that's why it's here for us to consider. To be honest, I don't know a lot about the background of it. It's not.
I mean, I understand that, but it's good. Hey, I don't have a problem. That's what, but as I mentioned, we have find wanting to do the same practice.
I mean, one suggestion that I thought of is maybe, you know, we can invite this individual or this group to come to council at some point before next year and sort of provide a presentation, give us some more information on what this is all about. I mean, I'm always reluctant to kind of put our name to something without having some background. Okay. If that's kind of the consensus, then I would suggest we just do a motion to receive the request for now, and then maybe ask staff to issue an invitation to this group to come and provide council some information. Okay, so move in second for that. All in favor? Okay, so that brings us to our notice of motion, which was at the last meeting by Councilor Charity. So the motion needs to be resolved. Or whereas the county of Shelburne wishes to promote and expand upon cycling routes. And whereas the county of Shelburne recognizes the importance of safe, well-marked routes. Therefore, be it resolved, council request staff to research and report back to council on ways to enhance signage on existing routes and identify areas where cycling routes can expand. So the seconder for that motion is Councilor Bernardo. Okay, Councilor Church, I'll let you do that for discussion.
Well. Unofficially, we bypassed in Shelburne is Greenwood to Fiddle Park Lane, and then up north, and it does see an awful lot of traffic and excessive speeds and what have you. We've also secondly got a splash pad going at Greenwood, which is going to have more kids traffic in the summer, and parents and kids spending in the summer. So the concern is, how can we implement some traffic calming and more public awareness that that is in fact a bus, or pardon me, a cycling route over and above the green patches on the pavement, which do wear down, which become less visible over time. If you look at other communities that have cycling routes, they have signs posted, share the road, not necessarily dedicated cycling lanes, because I know our roadways don't have room for those, but just more of a public awareness that, yeah, there will be kids cycling, there will be adults cycling. I think there are other opportunities to enhance the overall cycling routes in the area. I know we've got a couple of other routes that are kind of on sort of on paper, but haven't been identified or clearly marked yet. So it'll be an opportunity also to have those lanes named and marked in such a way that there's no question that these are in fact, cycling lanes. I also think that the signage would provide for some enhanced traffic calming under, just by visibility. Yeah, I'm not necessarily convinced that just the green patches alone are a good idea, or as visible as other options.
I've been at this for a long time. I started wanting to cycle roads within the town. I asked for they wanted the delineation of the roads like they have in the city, and I was told that wasn't possible. I agree with you, signage is required. The green signs that are on the roadway almost are the last ones painted when they are painted. They're not really the very first ones painted. I'm wondering if we can't have the line delineation because the road isn't wide enough to allow for it. Can we have more of those green signs put down on that road, starting from Main Street forward, right through Joel and Sound Street, making sure that in that area, there's more of those markings on the road, along with shared road signage on the side. When you get to the park, I think we discussed in the past that we also have right across the full park area, cross hatching, telling people that this is a park, that this is slow down type area to slow down because of children traffic, whatever you want to put. So that, again, that's another common method that I've seen where they put the cross hatches across the whole width of the road with slow down as a part of the center of it. So that would also help with the cycling if we force the, like you said, the speed issue up there. And I still believe in radar cameras being put there and tickets being handed out. So maybe you can put up there the faster speed than you would see.
Thanks, Councilor Brown. I would hope that council would consider phasing out the green patches in favor of something
more along the lines of what, say, Alton has. In terms of having markings more along the curves. Instead of big patches in the, so what if you take a drive through Alton, for example, they have signage, but instead of having great big square green patches painted that wear out, the markings for the cycling routes are more to the sides of the roads. Okay, they're single color, they're slightly smaller, but they are more frequent. So it still denounces the roadways as cycling paths, but I just, as you said, the green patches tend to be the last one painted in the season. They do receive a lot more wear and tear. I mean, like in terms of heavy trucks and cars, tires going over them, and they do wear out a lot quicker than say markings more along the sides.
We call them orange coats.
Yeah.
The streets down in Orangeville.
I was gonna say, I think the motion basically asking staff to bring back with sort of an update on what we can do. I mean, as a number of us here will know, 4 years ago, we had this discussion, we had a report from staff, that suggested we try to share markings. But I think, 4 years on, it's timely appropriate, to take a fresh look, we have 4 years of that method under our belt, maybe there are other things we can do. In addition to that, maybe there are things we can set. But let's give staff the time to kind of look at some other options.
We can more than 2 weeks.
Yeah.
We'll come back with the report. We'll provide the best practice to the points. Certainly appreciate the input, but there are probably over 100 communities that share markings just in Canada alone. Some of the operational issues can be adjusted in terms of timing. COVID did have some impact, but certainly let us come back with comprehensive and I guess balanced information without any predetermined outcome. And we'll certainly give you all the data for the decision.
Unfortunately, I think we're more than 2 weeks off.
If I may just ask a question to Councillor Charity, is this in regards to, are you focused on the cycling specifically, or are you looking for specifically traffic calming conditions?
Yes.
Good answer. Okay, then,
It will, you'll get some, I mean, something simple like a sign that says share the road and having, an outline of a walker and an outline of a cyclist. If you travel, coming back through, Marden, for example, where the trailheads are, they have a sign just posted that, just has those 2 iconic symbols on one sign even. It says that there are hikers and cyclists in the area and, to be mindful.
I just wonder if maybe we could ask staff at the same time where you're looking at different signages. I think it was Aaron put up traffic calming signs in the middle of the road. And I think I brought this point up before. If it's possible to look into potentially having these, what costs and implications of, the signs I'm talking about?
Yeah, we discussed it. I want speed bumps, remember?
Yes, exactly.
Those are, just to clarify, that is a very different request than share the road sign recycling.
Right.
So if it's traffic calming and it's vehicle traffic calming, similar to what you see in the village of Caledon and some of the others that we have at that's exactly report. We can certainly, we can accept it and would like both of these issues addressed, but we'll break that.
You'll get some offshoot from, if you throw up a sign that says, share the road, you'll hopefully get conscientious motorists and get some spillover into traffic calming.
Sure, and that's why I asked the question.
Yeah.
It's, are we looking at traffic calming, or are we looking specifically to make people more conscientious of cycling specific?
Well,
because it is kind of.
I think the thrust of the motion as it's written, as it presented, was to enhance signage on existing cycling routes.
And to expand cycling routes.
And if there's a spin-off effect, say,
Yeah.
generally calm traffic because of that.
Sure.
Okay.
Alton, I mean, not to cherry pick
I mean, Alton does have a good combination of chevrons along the side of the roads with signage. And they even have a couple of hashed areas for, I mean, that's something that's reasonably simple, reasonably local, that if you're driving through, you can have a look at. But I'm just not convinced that, you know, a horizontal green square on the side on the road is sufficient. No, I'm not huge. They just wear out. I mean, like people running through those roads, and, you know, probably they wear after they painted.
Everybody uses sidewalk there.
It's that clear enough on what you have?
Three worship, yes.
All in favor? Carried. All right. Okay, notice the motion for tonight.
I'll jump on that. Okay, so in the interview process that we went through, in regards to the, committees for council. One of the questions that we brought up to the DEI and accessibility committee for every one of these leads was what were some of the, priorities that town should focus on as far as accessibility goes. Where are we lacking and what can we do better? And there was a consistent message that came across in regards to our accessible parking spaces. And we know that we have parking issues at the stands. However, when you need an accessible parking space, trying to find one that's already full can be an exasperating event for some people. So with that said,
Hang on. And if he's bringing forward notice, should you say correct tonight, it's a procedural bylaw. That we can ask council if they will drop the procedural bylaw to allow this to be a motion rather than notice motion.
What's the motion presented? Yeah. With unanimous consent, we can have that.
I'd like to do it tonight.
Okay, let's hear the motion first.
so the motion reads as follows. Be it resolved, the council requests staff to look into the feasibility and costs associated with adding an additional 8 accessible parking spaces within the downtown core with the locations close to as follows. 2 spaces in front of Caravan Hills. 1 additional space in front of Town Hall. 1 additional space in front of the TD Bank. 1 additional space in front of the Royal Bank. 1 space on William Street opposite Kentucky. 1 space in front of the Dixie Fox. And 1 space in front of the campus. And to report back. Yeah.
Right, so Councilor Cloud has requested this matter considered tonight. Is there anybody that objects to that? Okay. Will you second it?
Yes, I will.
Okay.
It was a discussion between Councilor Green and myself after hearing some of the comments from some of the.
Okay. Any discussion on that?
I think I can do a little bit of discussion on that. We did hear a comment, for example, the TD Bank is one classic one where one person will park, go into the bank, maybe go on further shopping and whatnot, and then turn around and then have to circle around other people till that parking spot becomes available. The one in front of the Canada stop, there's one currently closer to the lights. There's a parking space. I happened to be walking down the street while I was waiting for the interview committee. I saw a lady park there, walk out, go all the way down to the Canada stop to go, and she had the sticker, the provincial disability sticker in her window. Somebody else comes along and they want to park there because they are going to either go to the Canada stop or go to somewhere else. They do the same thing, so go around, waiting to park in the parking spot where they can park nearby. Dixie Fox is a restaurant. No wheelchair parking in front of there. You're going into the restaurant for your park. Same thing at ID. There's only 1 parking spot, but this is weird, it's in the back, along with the 1 spot that the store itself provides. There's a lot of people with disabilities that go into that drugstore to get medication. So those are some of the reasons for these spots.
I know that on the back side of Caravaggio, there are two spaces that are handicapped, acceptable, spaces. On the back side of Caravaggio's, I'm not opposed to that. I think, and I guess this is maybe an issue for another day, or maybe it's an issue that we need to discuss. Piggybacking this issue is accessibility to the storefronts. I mean, it's one thing to have a handicapped parking space, but you know, there's the first hurdle. But the second hurdle is there are a number of stores in this community that don't have accessible entranceways. So I mean, I don't know if that's something we look at as two separate reports, or
Yeah, I think it's a separate issue. I know you raised that issue during the budget. It's on. And that we did get on it for grant, right? Yeah. Yeah, so I think when we get to that, point of something. Yeah. But that one a little bit more, but okay.
otherwise I'm not adverse to this at all.
The staff of any thoughts at this point? Well, in terms of timing, or, you know, is this okay in terms of scope to look at?
I just, yeah, we'll look at it, we'll provide you an analysis based on the thoughts you suggested. We'll also provide you with physical changes to parking that would have to result from a larger spot, and how that implicates or impacts the adjacent spot. We would also be suggesting that consultation with the DIA be a critical component of this, and that would be about it. I mean, I think the point that Councilor Bouchard made though is the IDA, using that as an example, how to fully handicap or we're not handicapped, but who are the back, they do not have the front. And so there's already 3 spots, if you count the 2 that they have and the 1 that we have in the back. Town hall also has dedicated spots, so we'll do an inventory of what we currently have. We'll look at a common standard and maybe shuffling some of them. But it also means curb cuts in some locations and taking out parking spots to put another one in. So a business would have to recognize that where they may have 2 spots or 3 in front of their place of business, they may go down to 1. So that's why the PIA, so give us some time, we'll certainly, we can call those requested spots and provide them.
Appreciate it. Comment about in the back. As one of the people to park back there. Pretty cool, most of the time, it's a hell of a park back there. So, I know there are spots. But if you're going to the bank, you park back there. You go to the bank, if you're going to IDA, you park back there, you go to IDA. Yeah, there are no spots, that's a problem. Yeah.
Okay, all right, all the questions, all in favor? Here, go ahead. Any other notices? Okay. So on to communications. This is one item that has been flagged at number 5, it was a recommendation attached to that one. Anything else is run forward that anybody wants to discuss? Okay. So number 5, the suggestion there, the recommendation is that we can look at that resolution which supports municipality of Trent Lakes, and essentially what it advocate for some changes to our municipal oath of office to recognize both the Constitution and laws of the country, in addition to our loyalty to the King, as well as recognition of Indigenous streets. Movement seconder that we're going to advance out as a begin. Second to that. Any discussion on that?
I assume that the wording and everything has been vetted through those that can be approved for that. So I just don't want to follow someone else's lead and then they haven't done their due diligence with contacting others and making sure that wording is accepted.
That is why I did the recommendation here to read it.
And. Yeah, I guess it does sort of provide prescriptive suggestive wording, but. I thought. Get parts that. Yeah. But I would think through the province if they. Are inclined to sort of. Look at revising this. They probably just, the intent is have some recognition.
So should it stay in principle as well? That we kind of. Support it in principle, like as it's written, we have the intentions for it, but. Because we're not 100% sure that wording is acceptable. As it stands, we're okay with it, but. I don't know, it gets work, right? And then just don't want to. Be wrong.
I think. And see, that it's been forwarded to Amos, it's been forwarded to Premier Doug Ford, and Deputy Premier Sophie Jones. So it's going to the province, it's going to Amos, which is the organization for Ontario, the municipalities, plus it's going to the Dufferin County Cultural Resource. So it's been forwarded to all of these people for comment. I think that if something is not kosher in there, we'll soon get a report back from them saying, hey, hang on here, this has to be corrected, this is a culture, something to be from that way. So I think we're okay, just because it's a resolution from forwarding them on to these different people for comment, I think we should be okay.
Obviously, places where we looked at it and started, did come up with their basic draft. Ultimately, because it's the open office, it's going back to the province of this. So it's not something that's standalone by ourselves. So I think there's enough to fit in, and then obviously sending it to our own circle. I think that kind of closes the other side.
Yeah, I mean, the actual words in the legislation, right? It does require change in provincial legislation, which you. Takes time, and normally involves a fair amount of consultation, but
I won't be doing it.
oh yeah. All right, everybody's okay with that, and all in favor? Okay. Anything else then in the balance of the list? Okay, then we'll just see those items. Not of ignorant. Favor. Carried. Okay, so we do have some closed session minutes. We don't have to go into closed session for approving the minute. If any member has questions or comments about the minute, so I think what I would suggest is we do have to schedule a closed session in our next meeting. So if somebody wants to discuss the minutes, but hold on, we do have to go into closed session at the next meeting. Otherwise, everything okay, we can approve in an open session. No idea.
They were in separate.
So,
I'm okay to prove that.
yeah, okay. All in favor? Carried. All right, and then just a motion for confirming bylaw. Majority, second slide, that moving. Favor. Carried, and motion adjourned. Meetings. Thank you all.